Nebuchadnezzar II. Now there's a name that really echoes through history, right? It sounds almost, well, mythical. But when you hear that name, what do you actually picture? A tyrant? A conqueror? Maybe something else entirely? Today, we're going to peel back those layers of legend and try to find the real man underneath.
You know, for a lot of us, this is the image that comes to mind, straight out of the book of Jeremiah. A lion, a destroyer of nations. It's this powerful, terrifying image of an unstoppable force. And honestly, it's defined him for centuries as this larger-than-life villain.
But here's the thing. Is that really the whole picture? Was he just a lion, just a destroyer? Or was there something more going on with the king who built one of the greatest empires of the ancient world? All right, let's really dig into this and try to separate the man from the myth. So if we want to understand the man who became this legend, we've got to go right back to the beginning. And I mean right back, to the name he was given at birth, long before anyone knew him as a conqueror.
Okay, so get this. His actual name in Akkadian was Nabu-Kudrui-Uzor, and what it means is, Nabu, watch over my heir. Think about that. It isn't a declaration of power or a title of conquest. It's a prayer. It's a father asking a god to protect his son. That detail, right there, already tells us this story is going to be way more complex than the legend lets on.
So, how in the world does a prince with a name that's basically a prayer for safety turn into one of the most feared conquerors in history? Well, the answer really starts with the absolutely chaotic world he was born into, a world of falling empires and massive power shifts.
You have to picture this. The whole region was in total upheaval. For centuries, the all-powerful Assyrian Empire had run the show, but now it was completely collapsing. And when an empire that big falls, it leaves this giant power vacuum. It was a free-for-all, a once-in-a-generation chance for a new power to rise up. And that's exactly where the Babylonians, led by a young, ambitious crown prince named Nebuchadnezzar, step in.
And this year, 605 BC, this is the pivot point. This is the moment that changes everything. And what's wild is, he wasn't even king yet. He was still just the crown prince when he was handed command of the army for what would become a world-altering showdown.
So, at the Battle of Carchemish, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't just beat the Egyptian army. He absolutely crushes them, annihilates them. In fact, Babylonian records brag that not a single enemy soldier made it home alive. With that one brutal victory, Babylon became the new, undisputed superpower in the Near East. His legend as a warrior starts right here. And what happens right after this incredible victory? His father dies. And just like that, Nebuchadnezzar is king. Now he has the full might of the Babylonian Empire at his back, and he's about to carve his name into history as a true warrior king. But here's something you might not know. His reign wasn't just one victory after another. Not at all. Sure, he conquered cities like Ascalon. But then, in 601 BC, he tries to invade Egypt, and it's a total disaster, a massive failure. And that failure was a huge deal because it made him look weak. And when you look weak, the smaller kingdoms you control start getting ideas. Rebellions start to simmer all over the empire.
And the most famous of all those rebellions? That's what leads us to the event that really cemented his infamous reputation. When the kingdom of Judah rebelled, Nebuchadnezzar's response was swift and brutal. He laid siege to Jerusalem, and in 587 BC, his army stormed the city. They didn't just conquer it, they tore it apart, destroyed its sacred temple, and dragged a huge part of the population back to Babylon. This is the act that would make his name feared for generations.
And if you want to understand just how calculated his brutality could be, just look at what he did to the Judean king, Zedekiah. He forced him to watch his own sons be executed. And then he had Zedekiah's eyes gouged out before throwing him in a Babylonian prison. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a message, a horrifying message to anyone else thinking of defying the king of Babylon.
Okay, so we have this picture of a ruthless, brutal conqueror. But that's not where the story ends, not even close. Because this man, this destroyer of nations, was also one of the greatest builders the ancient world had ever seen.
And this is the huge paradox of Nebuchadnezzar, isn't it? The destroyer was also the creator. And here's the kicker. All that destruction, it paid for the creation. He took the immense wealth he plundered from conquered cities, like Jerusalem, and poured it all into one massive project, turning his capital, Babylon, into the most spectacular city on the face of the earth.
I mean, the scale of this was just mind-boggling. He rebuilt the city's most sacred temples, including the massive ziggurat that likely inspired the Tower of Babel story. He built himself these gigantic, lavish palaces. And that stunning Ishtar Gate you've probably seen pictures of, the one covered in brilliant blue bricks with dragons and bulls, yeah, that was him. He literally paved the main processional street for the gods to walk on.
And then, of course, there's the legend, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The story is so romantic, right? He supposedly built this incredible, man-made mountain of lush greenery in the middle of a flat desert, all to comfort his wife, who missed the mountains of her homeland. It's a fantastic story. The only problem is, we've never found a single shred of archaeological proof or any Babylonian text that even mentions them.
So what are we left with? We've got the ruthless warrior on one hand and the master builder on the other. Two completely different figures, all wrapped up in one man. How do you even begin to make sense of a legacy that complicated?
Well, when you actually look at the historical sources, it's like you're reading about two totally different people. In the Babylonian records, he's their greatest king, a pious builder who gave them a long and prosperous 43-year reign. But in the biblical tradition, he's the enemy, a cruel tyrant, the man who destroyed their nation.
And if we break it down, you can see how your view of him completely changes depending on who you're reading. In his own inscriptions, he's a pious builder and restorer. In the book of Jeremiah, he's a ruthless conqueror, but also, strangely, called God's servant, an instrument of divine will. Then you get to the book of Daniel, and he's this despotic, pagan king who loses his mind. The portrayals are all over the map.
So, about that famous story, the one where he goes mad and acts like an animal, well, modern historians have a pretty fascinating take on this. It's almost certainly a case of mistaken identity. The details of that story actually line up way better with a different, later Babylonian king named Nabonidus, who spent years in a self-imposed exile in the desert. It seems like over time, the stories of different powerful kings all got mashed together and attached to the most famous name of all, Nebuchadnezzar.
So, in the end, where does that leave us? I think the historian Jasset Eli sums it up perfectly. We know what he did. He was a conqueror, he was a statesman, he was a great builder. But that's roughly all we know. The Babylonian sources tell us all about his actions, but almost nothing about his personality. The man himself remains an enigma.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Conqueror, creator, or tyrant? How should history remember a king like this? Is he the sum of the magnificent city he built, or the ones he burned to the ground? I guess the answer really depends entirely on which side of Babylon's walls you were standing on.